I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right, that said, long time asking about the tea and the crumpets, a long time colleague, comrade, legendary journalist and DJ, co-host of Hard Knock Radio, Breakdown FM, and soon to be, or just now, a co-author with Jeff Chang, my man DaveyD. Welcome to the show, brother. It's good to see you. Thanks for getting up early out there.
What up, man? Can you hear me? Can you hear me clear?
Man, appreciate you.
Can you hear me clear?
Hear you loud and clear. Appreciate it.
Okay, yep. Cool. Yeah.
Hope you're hearing me clear too.
Yeah, I am. Big shout out to Daruba. I got to get a hold of him. I haven't talked to him in a minute. That's the homie. I tell people all the time, I don't get in touch with Daruba. Daruba reaches out to me, and when that's like people always. I get a lot of contact. People like, can you put me in touch with Daruba? Like, Daruba reaches out. I don't even know where the brother is half the time. He just says, I want to come on and talk, and we make it happen. He's in your mind. He's in your heart. He's in your spirit.
There you go. Well put.
Yeah, but I've learned a lot from him over the years. So big shout out to him.
Yeah, no doubt. Absolutely. We always encourage people to go back. We have a strong catalog of interviews with him on this channel and at iMWiL.org. And I hope I'm not lagging too much. I see this connection issue is still creeping up. But anyway, man, let me just say this, so I know you wanted to come on. A couple years ago, I was invited, just for those who don't have this background real quick, I was invited briefly to temporarily work with the widow of C. Dolores Tucker and Peter Bailey, the legendary Malcolm X historian and scholar and former comrade, on an unpublished autobiography from Tucker. And I don't honestly know whatever happened with the project, but what I was starting to compile for that, I just put on my website and try to give a few presentations on, but was essentially not so much, again, a defense. And you can go, anyone can get this at iMixWhatILike.org. It's in the feature section right there. Hip Hop's Still Troubled Narrative, a Requiem for C. Dolores Tucker. And essentially what I was just trying to say here is that it's not so much a defense of C. Dolores Tucker as a person or a political figure, as much as it is a defense for part of her argument around the protection of rap music from becoming commercial property and corporate product turned against our community and our youth in particular. And one of the things that I did notice in preparing this was that long story short, that the narrative that has emerged around hip hop's history, part of which condemns Tucker as being part of an old school, repressive, petty bourgeois, old civil rights, with her own flawed political career, sort of attack on hip hop. And and that the frame was, initially that hip hop had to be defended against those saying it was just a fad or was just some anti-black backwardsness. And I think, in part, as part of that defense, what has ended up happening in the construction of a narrative that is supported, I would argue, by the corporate arena, by the state itself, that hip hop has helped drag Black and brown people out of relative poverty and obscurity in the 70s into a popular dominating force, cultural, if nothing else, force globally. And that this has all been about the tanning of America and the multiculturalizing of America and the broadening of America, even that brought us Obama and all this stuff. So to defend this narrative, which I argue is false, there was this need or emphasis to critique people like Tucker, but to the point where her argument was distorted, misquoted, misrepresented, and used as part of what I think is a very conservative defense of hip hop that ultimately ends up supporting much more right-wing conservative forces than certainly C. Dolores Tucker. So I'll stop there with that brief summary. I've already talked about that here on this channel. But Davey, you said you wanted, for lack of a better way of putting it, you had a criticism of my argument here, and obviously you're more than welcome to share it. So anyway, go ahead, and my man, and we'll go from there.
Well, I mean, I listened to the argument and I thought there was a lot of conflating of a variety of ideas. I mean, first of all, let me just say, I think history will and has proven that C. Dolores Tucker was right on a number of points in her critique of the type of music that was being put out by corporations. I'll say that, but I think in talking about the narrative, it's important to situate ourselves in the time in which it was being constructed, in what was going on, and the forces that were at work, the very real forces that were at work, that people felt that they weren't felt, they were actually dealing with. So that's one aspect of it, and we can get into that. The second thing is, in terms of Tucker herself, the reason why the narrative showed up the way that it did was because there was a lot of policing and conversation within hip hop about some of the things that she brought up. And there were very active figures. There were movements that had already been in place that she was never a part of. So it'd be like, there's already been a train that left the station. There's already been people on that train battling this thing. And she kind of came into people's purview, Johnny come lately, if you will, and never really had a conversation, at least with those forces that were at work. None of the people that were involved with the meeting of the minds conversations at the Latin Quarters back in the 80s, which really led to what people called the golden era of hip hop and definitely ushered in the whole concept of Afrocentricity to a younger generation who had never heard those terms. There was no conversation with that. There was no conversation with the type of work that was being done at places like The Good Life, or even at the Upper Room and other places where you saw progressive to radical type of outlooks on how we could move this thing called hip hop forward. And those places, I should say, were not fringe. The footprint of what those movements that I mentioned brought to the table exist to this day and have informed a lot of people. So the way that Tucker comes on the scene, in the backdrop, she's right alongside the PMRC, who overlooked and obscured some very important things that were going on in hip hop. She comes along the scene with folks who were, in my opinion, trying to be very theatrical. So the rolling of tapes in front of record stores makes for good TV. Yeah, Calvin Butts. It makes for good TV, but it wasn't a conversation. And at that time, I remember talking with everybody from Snoop on down. It's like, these people, I don't even know them. They never had a conversation with me. Now, at the time that this is happening, I think I want to say it was maybe 92, 93. You're not talking about kids anymore. You're talking about young adults. So you could have easily got on the phone and figured it out the same way that journalists and everybody else, including myself, had to get a hold of them. So to give a little backdrop for people who don't know what I've been a part of and how I kind of enter this, we raised these concerns about certain types of music, I want to say back in 88, 89. The show that I did, we would play Malcolm X, we would play King, we play Kwame Ture, we play a lot of speeches over music beats. And one day, a good friend of mine who did another show, Kevy Kev, said, how is it that you can play Malcolm X and then play NWA in the same show? NWA got their first interviews on our show up in the Bay Area. And so it was a good question. And we said, well, maybe we discuss this. So we had 2 weeks worth of discussion on air. It involved everybody from the members of Digital Underground on up to, our crew and the folks that did the 3 preeminent hip hop shows in the Bay Area. We did 2 weeks. And, those are all online and everything. And the agreement was, if the majority of our listeners felt that it was inappropriate to kind of play this music, then we would not do it. And so about 60-40 agreed, said, I don't know if it's appropriate to play this. So we said, we're going to boycott it. 2 weeks after that boycott, we had NWA on. We did a big interview with them. We informed them what was happening and why, in the context of which it was. And that boycott went on for about a good 2.5 years. I bring this out because this was something that not only made nationwide, you know, it was covered nationwide, but it also raised the conversation and the critiques that C. Dolores Tucker 4 or 5 years later would bring to the forefront. But it was never done in the type of what's the word I'm looking for? It was never done with the type of input that we got from community, at least in the way that we did it, from the artist. It was never done in the way that we felt was coming out of a place of love. This seemed to be alongside the very forces that had been against hip hop and, more importantly, Black expression from day one. So that's part of the gist of it. I started off by talking about, her critiques and the way that she went about it. Yeah, she had valid critiques, but my question would have been, what was the conversation with some of the women at the time that were doing things? That might have been Yo-Yo, who had her own organization, Intelligent Black Women Coalition. What was the conversation with Queen Latifah? What was the conversation with MC Lyte and, a host of others? What was the conversation with, folks like Public Enemy? Where was that conversation to maybe figure out how to enhance the work that they were doing versus the approach that she took, which was to clamp down on people who were enormously popular, and not because of corporations, but because of what they were doing? Example, Tupac. So we could I don't want to go on, but let's start building from some.
No, I appreciate that. And again, so I don't know if Tahir is being comical here, but this is sort of missing my point. And I think this is sort of where my argument has gotten lost previously. I'm not trying to resuscitate C. Dolores Tucker. So I would hope people would check out the piece that I actually wrote, because what I'm saying there, and maybe the title of A Requiem for C. Dolores Tucker, which I meant a little facetiously, is being misunderstood. But but my point isn't that anything that you said is wrong. My point primarily is that the reconstruction of Tucker's argument that has taken place in the examples that I provide in early journalism, in Chang and Charnas's work, just as 3 prominent examples, is it misrepresents Tucker's argument not to make the points that you're making, but to make the point that this old woman was just wrong. Hip hop had every right to do blah, blah, blah. And as if to support, as Charnas says in his book, that hip hop is an American capitalist success story. So to promote that mythological narrative, the condemnation of Tucker, I'm arguing, is disingenuous, because they're not making the argument that you're making, that Tucker was representing a conservative bougie thing, and that was meant to suppress a more progressive, radical, militant, thoughtful, activist, community and content and music. That's not the argument. The argument is just to use her as a straw to say these old civil rights Negroes were condemning us. We pushed past them, and look where we are today. That's what the narrative is supposed to say. But my point is, look where we are today. A handful of corporations control all the outlets, control all the popularization of the art. The wealth is extracted out of Black and brown communities at a greater pace than ever. We still don't have, any higher degrees of Black ownership. The reports show that artists get less per digital download than they were getting from spins and sales back in the day. So we're not progressing. So I'm saying that her fundamental argument was still correct. She was a flawed vessel, but the idea that corporations are going to destroy our cultural production with the intent, as she pointed out, to justify more incarceration and police violence against our youth, that is correct. And the people that are condemning her are not highlighting that point. That's really where I'm trying to go.
Okay, so I don't want to make it a debate per se, but because I think outside forces will use Tucker pro and con, and she was used pro and con. Conservative forces used her, and people who have other agendas will use her. She'll be the boogeyman in both parts of town, or the boogie woman. But with that being said, I think, you know, the important thing is to have, for us as Black folks, to have a larger context in which things were happening and to build from there. And that's what I felt was important, irregardless of what, you know, others have written, you know, because we lived through this, you know, and a lot of the work that some of those people did had to come from people like ourselves who did these boycotts and had these hard conversations and lived in these communities. So the backdrop of a lot of this, which also has an enormous footprint, was the crack era. And that's something that's left out of everybody's narrative, including hers, you know. So we have to kind of first deal with what the ravages of crack was doing at that particular time and the type of funneling of Black talent that emerged out of it, meaning that people said either you can get into sports or you can get into entertainment, or you can, you know, be out here and you can be addicted the same way that the users were to the enormous amount of money that was coming into our community for people who were invested in that trade. You also have to remember during this time, it was very violent. There was an enormous amount of violence. And this is why I come back to the work that was being done. And you could get somebody like a Paradise Gray on who wrote a book about, you know, the Latin Quarter, or you get Daddy-O from Stetsasonic, and then have this conversation that what was going on in the middle of the height, at the height of the crack epidemic, was these clandestine meetings with all the top artists to talk about what can we do? How can we turn things around? This comes in the wake of the killing of Scott LaRock, but they had a series of meetings called the Meetings of the Minds. And within those meetings, out of those meetings came the Stop the Violence movement, more than just a record, but these commitments to really, you know, deal and address Black on Black crime. Out of that came the Artists Against Apartheid. So you had a lot of people.
Hey, Davey, real quick, forgive the interruption, but I got to ask this. My man, Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows, I got to credit him with this. His argument is he has a critique of the Stop the Violence movement, which it suggests is that it was more of a Black bougie conservative call to keep venues open for performances, which were being shut to rappers, causing a lack of business that precipitated that movement as much as anything else.
Well, I mean, it's both.
There any? What do you think about?
No, I mean, I think that's a little simplistic. There's some truth to it. Yeah, there was. I mean, anybody who found that their lines of their opportunity to make money at a time when it was hard to do. This is your business. Of course, you're going to figure out ways in which to do it. But to stop the violence movement, the impetus behind it, to simply say that it was a way to keep venues open, I think is overly simplistic. And it was not in the heart and the minds of the people that I know that were involved in it. Sure. People wanted to make sure and wanted to do something with their talent. Remember, you talk about 17 and 18-year-olds, right? So they don't necessarily have all the political.
No, but I mean, but it's a lot like in similar to today, where the people who are on the front or on the mic who may be young are not necessarily in control of the process that puts them there or that is driving the movement, which is often people who are older. So that's where I would, but anyway.
All Black movements and Black expression gets used sooner or later by different forces. The question is, exactly which forces. So, of course, when Stop the Violence came up, it partnered with, for a period of time, I want to say, the Urban League, right? Of course, there were going to be people that were around that said, well, this is a good thing. It can help open the venues, but the point is the people at that meeting did not sit up there and say, this is a way to keep the venues open, even though that was a reality that they were dealing with. They were looking at the fact that at that club, people were getting killed. They were looking at the fact that one of their icons, the first, Scott LaRock, had been killed. They were looking at the fact that this was a conversation that was coming up in the community because you were starting to see the emergence of this violence connected with the crack trade that was happening. So these were folks that I think very earnestly were trying to figure out how to do that. And yes, it was also going to threaten some of the places that people wanted to go to.
No, go ahead.
That's one thing. So the second thing that you had was the apartheid thing, which I think is something that's often left out. And it was connected to the violence in this way. Many people were getting their gold chains snatched And this was a very intentional thing. Like, look, these gold is coming from South Africa. So we need to, if we want to have an effect, let's stop wearing this gold, and we can kill two birds with one stone. One, we can stop people. We're going to put a new value on things. It's not going to be gold. It's going to be these African medallions. And those who want to perform on, at least at the stage, we're going to take those medallions. We're going to take those chains off, have you put on the medallions. So these are things that people are trying to do. Let's shift the values. Let's put values in this over the gold. And so, you know, they did the posse songs. They raised awareness. You know, Stetsasonic did the whole thing with Free South Africa and joined. I forget the movement that they joined, but you know, people gave voice to that. And then the last thing that they were dealing with trying to do education. You know, the HEAL project comes out of that, raising money for schools, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a lot of things that folks were doing. You know, the three. So that.
But this is what I'm saying, and so Brother Tahir is definitely not feeling me, but he's missing my point. So Tahir, one, because I want to forgive me for doing this, but Tahir, I want to use you because I think you're emblematic of what happens with critics of my argument. So first, I want to make sure that you do go check the link and read actually what I've said here. So I'll put that in that so that I don't think you're very clear here on what I'm saying. With all due respect, but to this point, first of all, Trisha Rose was I think both of them were writing on this a little earlier than 94, but I think that's funny that you use 94 because to what you're saying, Tahir, and Davey, what you're saying, I think this is why I put in this piece here extended excerpts from Tucker's statements that are, I think, intentionally kept out of the dominant narratives are written by the folks in certainly in hip hop scholarship, and those that I cite here in this piece. So, for instance,
we get that. We get that. Not to cut you off, but I just want to. I want to just make sure that we have some of this frame right. Right.
I know, but Davey, see, this is exactly my point, because what you're saying about what hip hop and activists were doing in the late 80s or in the 80s and going into the 90s is exactly the point I'm making in my larger point, that the commercial environment, which are representatives of the state and allow the elite to rule in anonymity, that's all corporations are here really to do. That their involvement beginning more aggressively in the early to mid 90s was a response to what you're talking about was happening more organically and naturally within the community that was both producing rap music and hip hop culture, but looking to engage politics more broadly speaking. There was this tremendous undercurrent that I think is under discussed in a lot of the prominent hip hop scholarship and journalism, and that is left out of the context that both this criticism that I'm waging and that Tucker herself was looking to develop emerges.
But Tucker wasn't developing that critique, and let me make my point. That's the larger thing. The reason why I'm walking you through this timeline, if you start talking about 87, 88, 89. Around this time, you have the PMRC that starts to form, right? And so within the PMRC, sure, they go after NWA, who's on the scene. They go after some of the rock folks, but then they quickly pivot and they start coming after the artists. They go after 2 Live Crew, but they also went after Public Enemy. They also went after some of the positive groups, you know, and we're finding things. For example, I remember having to go on CBS TV, one of the affiliates out here, because of by the time I get to Arizona video, right? And on that newscast, they were calling, you know, Public Enemy a very violent group whose music should be boycotted because in the song, you know, Coming to Arizona, they show the blowing up a car of a senator and the poisoning of a senator that refused to put the holidays together. X-Clan came under fire, primarily because they helped lead that big march with the December 12th movement and others, you know, across the Brooklyn Bridge in response to Yusef Hawkins. So you had all these Afrocentric groups that were coming under fire. So either the term either they were called anti-Semitic because of some of their remarks, or they were called
and
violent
Tucker's
because
not
of their
involved in
rhetoric.
any of this, though.
She's not
involved in any of that. That's my point.
Okay. She's nowhere to be seen on that, right?
That's my point.
But the forces that she aligned herself with they were the ones that were leading that charge.
This is the point. Please, if I could be allowed to make this point, this is what I'm trying to get at that is being misunderstood here. That yes, she aligns herself with these white, right, conservative, culture vulture, whatever folks to make her, like William Bennett and others, to make the point. But the very people that are condemning her are aligning themselves with the very same corporate American world to promote a version of our art and our cultural expression that is harmful to us, that far outweighs the power and damage done by a William Bennett. So that's one huge contradiction.
I don't follow. Break that
what do you
down
mean
for me. Maybe
the argument, because Davey, the argument was to Tucker and others, don't be critical of the corporate world that is involving itself in hip hop, because you're condemning Black youth and Black cultural expression and Black freedom of speech. And in so doing, that sides with the very corporate world that has been intentionally destroying the popular cultural expression of Black people to do the very thing C. Dolores Tucker has been saying. Now, if I could please finish this one little point, so I can read. I just want to share these two quick segments from excerpts of Tucker's work that has been intentionally removed by the most popular hip hop scholars and journalists for decades, and is continuing to, I think, confuse the discussion in the chat and even a little bit that we're having. So again, I am not defending Tucker or her politics. She is, from my vantage point, a conservative, civil rights, bougie, so on and so on and so on and so on. That's not my point. My point is she is being used as a straw argument by the very people who are themselves no more politically left than she was, and who themselves want to defend and promote a historical narrative of hip hop that allows for us to be confused about what hip hop has meant for a supposed advance for Black and brown people, and for us to lose sight of the fact that as hip hop has become more popular, the material conditions of the people that produce it has gotten worse. All right, so this is the two quick points I want to say that are constantly left out. So she says here, for the record, I wish to state that the NPCBW, which is her organization, is not against rap. It is not against hip hop. To the contrary, we support and encourage the artistic creativity of our young people. We love our young people. However, we are against gangster rap and misogynist lyrics. Some $780 million worth of rap records were sold in 1993, again, which predates what Tahir is saying she wasn't involved. And more than half of the purchasers being underage of 17, and 50% of these minors were between the ages of 10 and 14. Something must be done. It is our moral responsibility, so on and so on and so on. And the other piece here that is constantly left out in terms of your point about the not understanding the context of drugs and crack cocaine, she says here, as an illustration of this, let me share with you excerpts from a letter I received from a prisoner in Lorton, Virginia. He said, rappers make it sound so good and look so real that I would drink and smoke drugs like on video, thinking that this was the only way I could become somebody. My hood girls became hoes and bitches. What is so bad about it is they accepted it. You know why? Because they put themselves in a video too, and the guns, money, cars, drugs, and men become a reality. Look where this kind of thinking got me, facing 25 years to life. Racism and greed are the sustaining forces behind gangster rap. It is no coincidence that the characters displaying the most indecent behavior for all the public to see are African Americans. Some argue that these artists are merely speaking frankly about their reality and Black cultural experiences, but as Dr. Benjamin Hooks, former executive director of the NAACP, has noted, our cultural experience does not include debasing our women, glorification of violence, deviant sexual behavior. So I'm only sharing those brief excerpts to point out, one, that her argument is different than it's popularly reported, whatever her reasons are, and that they're not excerpted properly. She's not quoted properly. Those comments and others that I outlined in that piece have been kept out of the narratives developed by Chang, Charnas, certainly Dyson and others, as I talk about in the piece. And all ultimately, and I'll stop here for your response, all ultimately to the benefit of allowing the very corporate takeover that Tucker has been or was warning of, that is more powerful today than ever, and has done what she was rightly calling out, that these folks have erased from the narrative. That's close to my point. Go ahead.
Okay, so the letter that she reads is a very elementary type of letter in comparison to the complex type of analysis and conversations people were having by 93, 94. That was an argument that we may have had in 88, 89. In fact, we did. If I pull up, the arguments that we had, the debates that we had around the NWA boycott, that was the discussion then.
Davey, it's an argument I make in 2021. So my only point of bringing that up, though, Davey, is to say that has been left out. It's not about her being right. It's to say that has been potentially kept out of the discussion.
Let me make my point.
Right.
Okay, so, we're not, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about what the narrative was at that time. Mm-hmm. So when this comes out, this letter, it's like we already been down this path and we've already moved, and part of what the movement was at that time was like, look, people are going to express themselves the way that they do. Let's just make sure this other expression, which at the time, at least going up into about 92, the predominant type of rhetoric that you were hearing from the artists was more in that golden era Afrocentric point more than the other. That's where the big footprint was. So that's one point. The second thing is when you go back to what was happening at that time, hip hop was engaged in another battle. And that battle was, where was it going to find a home? So I remember very distinctly, black radio stations, with the exception of a few. There might have been, I think, Tolliver ran one in Cleveland. There was another one out of Houston, and definitely the station in Los Angeles, K-Day, where, which I don't think was black owned, but definitely all black formatted, where most stations were like, we don't want this. We don't want this at all. We're not trying to play this rap. We don't care if you're Public Enemy or if you're 2 Live Crew. Maybe we'll do a Saturday night mix show, right? And many folks found themselves trying to find his home, and the places that opened it up tended to be on the crossover side of things. And so with the opening of that also came the opening up of hip hop to the crossover aspects of the music labels themselves. So I could tell you stories anecdotally about people sitting, at the, outside the doors of some of these black radio stations. Can I get a job? Can I come on the air? Can I be a part of that? And these were the folks that were the gatekeepers that were saying no. I could tell you the stories of being at the New Music Seminar and seeing a young Dana Owens, who was just Latifah, jamming up, black executives and saying, why are you not playing our music on the air? This is before they became superstars. We're talking about in the 80s, and these folks telling them that this music had no place, had no home, and that they didn't think it was worthy. So people went to other places that said, you know what, we will take this wholesale. What you saying? Fight the power. We'll put this on the air. What are you saying? Red, black, and green. We will play this. X-Clan will tell you they got their first major radio play on the crossover station out here, not the black-owned stations, right? And so what you started to have was relationship. And the music business, as you know, is a business of relationships. And some of those relationships will be some white boys. It may be also be some black folks. It may be your own peers who happen to get into key positions, which was starting to happen by 92, 93. You started to have the ascension of some of these folks who were coming out of hip hop and saying, let me pull this, let me pull that, and let me do this. So the complexities that folks were now starting to discuss in 93, 94, Tucker wasn't around. So to hear, I saw his comment was right. She was not in those rooms. And so it raised the question is, who is nurturing and who is supporting? Who's in the ears and who is around these folks to give them guidance and to give them, encouragement? And you didn't have that. You didn't have it from all these folks, the civil rights generation, if you will. You had it coming from a lot of other people, and many latched on to certain figures. So if Tupac would have been somebody, who had a harsh critique, but Tupac was also being heralded as like, look, this is a manifestation of what we were back in, once upon a time. He's a continuation of the freedom struggle. You had people say that, elders. You had the Nation of Islam and others that were very supportive of a lot of the Afrocentric groups. So people aligned themselves with where they saw things going. Tucker wasn't in those conversations. Now, when she went to the Senate, none of those artists were there in the Senate to speak. She was there representing the Black community. I think Ron Starworth was there.
And Dyson was there to represent the artists. And but this is my point, Davey. Again,
but the artists themselves weren't there. And no disrespect to Dyson, he wasn't in those meeting of the mind things at the Latin Quarter.
I'm not defending him either. I don't want him to be involved in. What I'm saying is Dyson and others consistently misrepresent Tucker's argument to make their own conservative argument that ultimately ends up siding with the corporate world that has done and continues to do all this damage. So I'm not defending Tucker. I don't agree with Tucker and her politics, which may be one of the reasons why I never heard back from her widow about my piece being involved in this book. But my point is that it's at the same time, it is disingenuous for people to misrepresent her argument, to literally truncate her commentary, to represent it in a way to defend their own non-radical critique. Their own argument is that hip hop has been all to the good for Black people and the country and the world. And I'm saying that narrative is garbage. And
that's not how a lot of people within hip hop see it.
Okay, but my point is make the argument without disingenuously representing someone else's statements. That's my only point.
But the argument against Tucker were very genuine. That's how people saw her. So you can highlight the people who have.
Davey, I'm not talking about the rap. Look, I heard all the. Look, I listened. I rocked the lyric. I said them myself. See, Dolores Tucker, you evil motherfucker. All of that stuff. I said all of it with the rappers, with KRS, with everybody back in the day. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying now, as we have the ability, as an academic, as a journalist, as a whoever, to say, let's look at the historical narrative that has emerged since then about hip hop. I'm saying that if we look at that, we can say, looking back, we can say, wow, look at what early journalists did and what they did wrong. Look at what more recent hip hop scholarship has done and done incorrectly. And even more recent hip hop scholarship continues to do incorrectly in representing this woman's argument falsely as a straw to present to present some other. So I'm not critical of the artists back in the day. I'm not critical of myself as a young hip hop connoisseur for siding with the artists and condemning all of these bougie and the Tuckers and all that. What I'm saying is I'm not that same young man anymore. And as someone who has been able to look back and read and actually look at what she actually said and what was said about her, I'm arguing there has been a reconstruction, not to defend her, but to defend the point that all the stuff that you were talking about in terms of the early attempts within the community to defend against the imposition of jewelry and commercial this and that, that lovely history has been suppressed beneath this narrative that hip hop is the trajectory of it has been all linear and all positive, all to the good, and people like Tucker were always wrong and should.
Where has it been suppressed?
Where has what been suppressed?
The efforts of the golden era that we're talking about, because that's out there. There's been books written, there's been documentaries that's been put out.
It's not, and I'm talking about a dominant narrative, Davey. When you turn on these commercials, look, I just taught a class this semester. I know you teach all that. And when you look at all the dominant, the histories that come on about hip hop and all the commercial documentary, I'm not talking about all that is. In fact, the point, and even in the piece that I'm citing here, I reference some of that scholarship, some of it even Trisha Rose, Errol Henry, all this scholarship that has pointed, James Spady, that has pointed to this history that you're talking about. But they're not recounted in these narratives. That's not the dominant narrative even in Chang's work. That's not what shows up on CNN and MSNBC and when they do these let's look at hip hop. and when they talk about the tanning of America, and when they do, you know, the hip hop histories with the new version of Queen Latifah and LL and all, they're not talking about the Latin quarters, this and the medallion. They're not doing any of that history. They're not promoting that, and they're certainly not talking about it in the context of a commercial, corporate, imperial imposition of this anti-black, anti-woman, commercial, hyper, you know, capitalist form of art. That's not the discussion. It's again, it's discussed in the context that it's an American capitalist success story, and it's not in a sort of colonial conquest. So my argument, again, well, anyway, so that's what I'll just, let me stop there, give you a chance to respond.
Yeah, I mean, look, from the standpoint of people involved, hip hop is a success story. You may disagree, but you know, I feel as somebody who's been involved since '76, I owe my success to this. You know, I think the people that I've come up with would say that there's a lot of success around that. Now, we may have a different alignment politically. We may define success differently. But the point is how people see it and how they ultimately articulate what they feel is successful. I got to go by what they feel is genuine. Now, does that mean that the things that people can point out, mass incarceration and income inequality and all these things don't exist? They absolutely do.
They're worse. They're all worse.
Right. Yeah, but that's not because of hip hop. I'd say that.
No, my point is hip hop didn't save anything. That's my point.
Nobody said that it's well.
They're telling. Look, they told us it got us Obama, and that was a good thing. I disagree with that. It told us. It told us.
Wait a second. Yeah, but if you were, I was in the room with the 10,000 people in Houston. Now, you might have been the lone voice to say no, but I saw those 10,000 people of a who's who.
What are you talking about? I wasn't in the Houston one. Which one are you talking about there?
At the Ozone Awards, when they made that commitment, with everybody from Rick Ross to David Banner, all those artists were there, and they talked about what they were going to do. It's online; you could see it there. I filmed it. You know, they talked.
And they said they're going to do what?
They were going to put on their Sunday best. I think it was either Killer Mike. Mm-hmm. Or David, I think it was Killer Mike or David Banner that said, we're going to put on our Sunday best and make sure that this man gets elected. They were part of that history. I was in Houston with
But Bundy, I think that's a negative. That's not a positive, because the room I was in was in 2004 in Newark, when everybody at the hip hop convention said we had to support John Kerry. And I was like, oh, hell no, this is a mistake. And what you're talking about is a culmination of the mistake I saw happening in 2004.
That's fine. You know, we can, I understand where you're coming from. I'm just sitting here and I'm saying that people who have their understanding of politics, who have their own agency, right? Nobody's putting a gun to their head, who have their outlook and understanding. Maybe it's naive, maybe it's a mistake, maybe it's all those things. I can give you that. But this is what they felt at that moment. In 2004, this is what they felt in 2008. And any of us who had a different perspective had to figure out, or was charged with how to figure out how we're going to change minds to move in another direction. You know, and I would say, from having been there at some of those places, this wasn't because big corporate money came there. The labels weren't there at the Ozone thing saying, this is what you got to do. These were people who looked around, who were basically our age and, you know, or close to it, who said, this is what I think I want to do. I live in Arkansas. This is what my mom.
But Davey, you're talking about, when you were talking a few minutes ago about the lack of sophistication in the argument from that C. Dolores Tucker letter. My point is you're doing a disservice to all the analysis that has evolved since then. So I'm not saying Davey, okay. I'm not saying corporations stand over somebody and say this, say that. It's not that easy. It's more sophisticated than that. The reason those artists were there with enough prominence to have a voice at that Ozone gathering is because they were already representing a politics that the corporate world would want to promote and make popular, which was to the detriment of radical traditions and trajectories that were pre-existent and still existent in both hip hop and outside in the community.
I think you would have to talk to those people
I don't have to talk to them. I don't have to talk to them. I don't have to talk to them. No, Davey, you don't have to talk to an artist to understand how the corporate world relates to artists and why they promote artists over other artists.
I think you have to talk to people. First of all, that's not across the board true in terms of who got promoted and who didn't. I mean, that's a very simplistic thing. If I'm down in Houston, yeah, because if we're talking about a lot of independent artists, say somebody like a Trade of Truth, for example, in Houston, that's not corporate back. That's somebody.
Davey, I'm not. Come on now, that's not fair. You can't use your brilliant and in-depth knowledge of everything in hip-hop. Because that artist is, nobody knows who that artist is outside of you, and none of the students in my classroom know who that artist is. They know who is the heavily promoted artist. No, Davey, they don't know who that is. They don't know who that is.
Listen,
he doesn't have an influence that Killer Mike has, or that Nas or Jay-Z has. Come on, man.
Really?
Yeah, really. Yeah,
I'm gonna use that as an example. Okay. Look up Trade of Truth.
Okay.
And see his influence in Houston. And I probably would argue
in Houston. Okay, but I'm talking about national politics.
But we're talking about things of regional, and people respond regionally, just like the Bay is regional, just like Houston is regional, Chicago's regional, DC is regional. And those regional things may have a narrative that threads across lines. So just because, let me make my point. So I would never say my class is the barometer for what is happening and not happening. What I'm going to look at is, how do people respond to people that they find influential in their particular region. Now, what ultimately gets uplifted by CNN and corporations, we can debate whether or not that ultimately turns the tide, so to speak. You know, that's a whole other argument and a whole other show. But what I'm going to say, and I'm emphatically will say this, is that people have their agencies and have their own way in which they come to political conclusions. I don't want to get hung up in this. What I was just sitting there saying is that a large number of people took a political stance and moved in a particular political direction, for better or for worse. It may not be the one that you, me, or people listening agreed with, but it's one that they did take. And it's a reality that we had to deal with. To sit there and shit on them and say, nah, they was wrong. I think it's like, well, did you have that conversation? You told me you don't need to have the conversation. I did have those conversations. We did a whole documentary on them. We with our own money. We went around and talked and asked people those questions.
That's not what I was saying, Davey.
But this is what I'm saying, to give a larger context in which we're talking about, right? The reason why I said with the C. Dolores Tucker thing, to come back to, I said, I agree with you. And I feel that she was right in the long run on most of what she said. Her stance against the misogyny and the types of things that were being peddled by corporations, she was spot on. And we did not see that at the time. But I was also saying there was a context that we needed to be situated in to understand why, and why those arguments continued. And so I was painting that picture, and I was saying, here were some of the things that were going on. And this is why the reaction to her was so visceral, because that's what you really saw, was a visceral reaction to her. And it wasn't because she just showed up. They didn't have a visceral reaction to Tipper Gore and others. They had one to her, you know, and there was a reason for that. And so I was trying to put that in context to say that whether it was her intention or not, the perception that people had was she was aligned. She was in the same room with the very people that wouldn't play those records when they were talking about Fight the Power. She was in the same room with those people. Those were her peers. So it was hard, and people didn't know how to separate her from the other folks that were sitting there, because they all ran in the same circles. They came from the same cloth. So now we can look back and say, well, damn, you know what? She was a little bit different than Frankie Crocker. I'm just using a name. She was a little bit different than Bruce, who told Queen Latifah he wasn't going to play her thing, right? She was different. She was a different cut. But at that time, it wasn't seen that way. And so she was dismissed alongside with all those others.
But Davey, what I'm trying to say in my piece,
and I'll close with this. I'll close with this. So she was dismissed with all of them. the same way that we wouldn't unearth the deeper meaning of some of those people who initially rejected hip hop is the same type of thing that happened with her. She was a part of it. It's like, I'm not trying to check for you, him, or her. You all were in the same cloth. Y'all can, walk off. Now, others like you and myself, we did look back and we were able to see like, oh, damn, she made some points. But even when she made those points in 94, I'm just giving the context into why it wasn't heard and still hasn't been heard in some circles.
But again, you're that is not my argument. I am not being critical of what was said back in the early 90s. I am only recounting what was said back in the early 90s to be critical of what has continuously been said about that time period by people writing since then.
Mm-hmm.
So the early journalists, they started the problem. That's what I start to outline. I use Chang and Charnas as very recent, dominant hip hop historians whose works have been used to to overlay all of the other work you were talking rightly about earlier that make other points and have other emphasis. So what I'm saying is the narrative frame that looking back on that time period has been falsely created to justify something that's happening today that I don't agree with should be considered progress. So that's my point. The only thing I was trying to say about not having to talk to artists wasn't to sound as demeaning as I think you were reframing it and recounting it. I'm saying I don't need to talk to an artist to understand the corporate relationship they have or to understand what the corporation is trying to do with that artist. And I certainly don't have to talk to an artist to understand why a corporation would be promoting that artist over another. I just simply have to look at and listen to their content. And what I'm arguing is the very corporate takeover that Tucker and others were warning about in their own imperfect ways, deserving of criticism then and now, is correct and has taken place and is not being properly accounted for, as this dominant narrative is saying, hey man, everything is more or less better or in progressing or has gotten, or it has improved largely because of the wonders of hip hop. And I'm saying, as much as I love hip hop and all of its wonders, it has not led to the kind of improved world that many want to give it credit for. In fact, it has been used to deny an advance and to cover the lack of an advance. That's really. But that said, look, man, I know we're coming up on an hour and I want to at least give you time. And I know it's going to sound kind of funny, and I think it is kind of funny, but I do want to give you a chance to talk about the new work you're doing with Jeff Chang. Because, I mean, because I was late to knowing about it. I admit that. And so at least please tell us about it.
So first of all, in Can't Stop, Won't Stop, the first edition, that was published in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And he started it 10 years prior. Mm-hmm. So when he starts writing, it's in the middle of the Tucker thing.
Look, so man, I'm not going to look. He had every right and all the time in the world to go back and get right what I got.
No. I'm just telling you.
And he had a fat advance to he had all the money and time in the world to get it right. He can talk for himself. He can. He has here. Yep.
You asked me to.
Yeah, I hear you. My bad. Go ahead.
Okay, so don't cut it off and tell me that we're wrong.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying he had a chance to do it.
You got to talk to the man. You got to talk to the man himself to ask.
I have, Davey.
And this is what he said. What he said? What, for the record?
Honestly, I don't remember the interviews online. I mixwhatilike.org. People can go. I'll put the link in the show notes. He disagrees with me. He agreed. He disagrees with me. Everybody disagrees with me. That's why I wrote the piece. The piece. Show me where I'm wrong.
Okay, so I just want to say that in this one we took things up to 2020. Mm-hmm. We wrote a lot of parts of it. We added a lot of things that were left out in the first one. We centered women a lot. We looked at the contributions of women from page 1 to page 2. We take it all the way up to the George Floyd protests. We take it all the way up to the pandemic. We look at what's getting ready to unfold with the 2020 elections. So that's where it kind of ends. I think, we look at regional histories, which is what I was alluding to before, and we look at the impact of that, how people were seeing the world. Initially back in 92, Tupac talks about that in our early interviews. He talks about the regional influences and how things were. He didn't want to see things centralized. And if there was a corporate takeover, it's when it's centralized. But where we're at now, and from all the stuff I've done, we might have done about 40 interviews on this book. People want regional stuff. They, it's like, what's the Detroit history? The New York narrative is cool, but, we just did a big thing in Detroit. And I mean, all their pioneers are there and they have a story to tell. Same thing with Chicago, same thing with Boston. And so we looked at those regional histories that are about, at this point, maybe 30, 40 years, with a lot of intricacies and a lot of different directions that we think are interesting. We knew we couldn't cover all that in depth, but we wanted to acknowledge it and give people taste and pass the baton to others to go deeper. We look at, we talk about the meeting of the minds and those things that were taking place during the Afrocentric period, because that was a narrative that was left out. We talked about Pac and Biggie, and we talked about the big meeting that was in Chicago, where we met with the minister and Kwame Ture, and the type of conversations that he had, which at the time, the minister asked us not to share all the content because people were very vulnerable and people were very forthcoming. And he, so the parts that we did were things that we actually. So
you saying you got the missing Farrakhan tapes in this new book?
No, it's not the missing thing, because and it wasn't, I wouldn't say the missing Farrakhan, because everybody was there at the meeting. Yeah. Everybody was there at the meeting. And 2 weeks after this was after Biggie got killed. 2 weeks afterwards, they came on the air. And so I was allowed to play one of the things. They asked not to play the tapes, but they said you could play this part. And so, of course, we recount that in the book. And I've written about that before. But we talked about the outcome of that and the imprint that I think that meeting had with the way that people moved afterwards. We talk about, Ferguson, Grant, and all those things. So we continue giving it a political and social justice lens that we look at it from, and just kind of round out that history. So it was designed for quote unquote a younger audience. I don't think we diluted anything, but when we say younger, the way I explain it is that instead of maybe referencing a group like X-Clan, who me and you would know, we may say, Cardi B or somebody who they would know, and we start building from there.
And plus, Cardi B, X-Clan, it's about the same content. It's about the same thing. WAP for X-Clan is, West African pride, right?
I'm not mad at WAP, and I'm not mad at the song.
All right, hey, whatever. No, hey.
But I'm not, and and a lot of people aren't mad at it. The same way we weren't mad, same way that people weren't mad at Lil' Kim, the same way they weren't mad at any other artist that was salacious back in the days, whether they were on screen or on record. And, there's a line to that. There's always been that salaciousness in our community. Some of it was more underground than others, but, the Pam Greers and the,
Amen. Pam Greer, Lord have mercy.
There you go.
Lord have mercy.
You know what I'm saying? So, but we don't stay focused on that. We're looking at the Cyrocs and Rhapsodies as well. So, right I think, so we cover a lot of ground. We look at things internationally, some of the things that's been popping off, and it's a good book. I think we did our thing on it. A lot of people seem to really embrace it and like it. And we showed a lot of the intentionalities that people had, whether it was the gang truces and, these meetings of the minds or these other meetings that people, were like, look, I don't like what's going on. How can we change the dynamic for better or for worse? We acknowledged the efforts and looked at, the ways in which people did, including the political conventions, including Rosa running, for the Green Party and all that. We put all that in there to show that, look, people didn't like what was going on. They picked up things and they said, let's try it ourselves. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
So that's
and some things we're still looking at. Yeah.
the Can't Stop Won't Stop Young Adult Edition. I'm late to getting it, man. I have to honestly have to get it and check it out. I'm just late. I told you privately I missed the whole joint, and you were like, "Dang, how'd you miss it?" And I was like, "I miss a lot of stuff, so I apologize."
It's all good, man.
But definitely want to check it out. And yeah, man. Hey, man, Davey, I appreciate you, man.
Appreciate you, Jared.
I thank you for coming through. Definitely thank you for coming through the remix last week and dropping some important stuff on Shock G. And these quarantine mixes you've been doing, I hope people check those out as well on Mixcloud and elsewhere. Breakdown FM, DaveyD on Mixcloud. Google it if you don't already know. Mr. DaveyD, so that you don't miss anything. And hey, man, shout out to you, man. Good looking out. I appreciate you.
And let me just say, for people listening, we always have these debates like football teams.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, there's some corny.
Me and Jared always have these debates, man. So it's all
there's
love.
some corny folks that always, misunderstand stuff wherever. Look. One of the problems, look, I appreciate you bringing that up because a lot of people look, disagreement, debate is not a negative, man. Nobody's so like look, man. I mean, I don't know, man. Anyway, we do this all the time. It's all good.
We're not going to hang up the phone and be like, "Damn, that Jared Ball."
And I want to say, you know what? Speaking of which, Davey, I want to say this, man. I think I don't know if I've said this publicly to you, but I want to shout you out for something because I've talked about this a lot over the years since it happened. We had a disagreement some years ago over something on Facebook. I don't forgot who reached out first. Got on the phone and got all straightened out, clear, and have moved on. And not everybody does that, man. And I just appreciate that. So I want to shout you out for doing that. I don't know if I'm lagging all of a sudden, but I really appreciate you doing that. And I don't know. I appreciate it. And I just wanted to big that up.
The context, this is food for thought for people to look at. I'm always a strong believer that people should look at all these different contexts. I think we all love Black people. I think we all we want to see our people do better. And, and we're just giving, at least I'm trying to just give these other angles to a larger argument that people can dig into. But now we all brothers at the end of the day.
Of course. So, and honestly, you cannot understand the history of hip hop if you don't know Davey's work. So if anybody is unfamiliar, get familiar. I meant it when I said he is a legend in this. And, I got to get caught up to the latest. So again, thanks, Davey, man. I appreciate you, man.
Thank you, man. Have a good one. And a big shout out to the work y'all are doing, man. This is looking pretty slick, man. This is nice.
We getting there, man. We learning, man. Look, I told you years ago, I followed you I was trying to do a version of you out here with the mixtape thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, your journalism, I mean, you've laid it down, man. So I'm still trying to, we are building here.
You got a nice team, a nice crew.
Yeah.
And stellar guests.
We do pretty good with the guests, right?
Yeah, I'm like, man, you got these people. I need to get some of these names and numbers. So.
Oh, absolutely. Of course. And then we got Davey coming through. That's wrapping it up for the day. Save the best for last on this one.
But let me get these kids to school. You all have a good one and peace out.
It's early out your way, man. Take care, man. Peace to you, Davey. Thanks again, man.